What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Just Friends. This is the third episode of Musing with Mitch. So, if you guys have been following along, you know that I'm trying something new with the podcast, and this episode is no different. It's a totally different concept. It's something that I haven't done before up to this point. So, I hope you guys like it. If you do, let me know in the comments. If you don't, let me know in the comments. Before we get started, I'd like to ask if you're listening on Facebook, please like. And I don't think you can subscribe to the show, but you can follow the Just Friends podcast page on Facebook. And you can also join the Just Friends community page or the community group on Facebook. So if you haven't done that already, please do so. If you're watching on Instagram, go ahead and like the video, share it with anybody, and follow the Just Friends Instagram page. And if you're just listening to the audio version, please subscribe to the show and share it with everybody that you think would enjoy it. So like I said, this episode is just a little bit different than the ones I've done in the past. I hope you guys like it. So let's go. I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge that the weekend was ending until we were already back in the apartment. The girls were already packing, a mess of bodies hurriedly filling bags and folding blankets. Elena and Erica should have been on the road hours ago, and as it stood, they would be driving late into the night. Sarah and I didn't have to be home until the following evening, but everybody else had work the next morning, so our bags were packed in the back room, and we were moments away from driving back to our lives so far from each other, and it was eating me up inside. I'd reached out to Elena and Caitlin about a possible get together the moment that I learned that we were moving to Richmond. Caitlin and her wife Teresa live about 3.5 hours away in Annapolis, and Elena and Erica are like 11 hours away in Covington, Kentucky, near Cincinnati. But after a year in lockdown, the last thing that any of us was going to do was let a little bit of driving stop us from seeing our friends. Over the next few months, we started scheming. Through random bursts of text messages, we planned it all out. A weekend trip to Annapolis, 2 weeks, 3 couples, 4 dogs, and 1 orange tabby cat in a 2-bedroom apartment. One big happy family. The drive to Maryland was a fog of gray highways. I spent most of the time in my head, daydreaming about our destination and reminiscing about the people who were waiting for us there. The weeks leading up to the trip had been challenging for lots of reasons, and some of those weeks had even been traumatic. And I think I had slipped slightly inward behind old walls built for protection from strong emotions. I noticed as I drove that my excitement about the weekend was more of an understanding than a feeling. I knew I was excited more than I felt it, if that makes sense. That idea was fully realized about a mile away from the girls' apartment. A flash of orange in an upcoming driveway caught my attention. And as we drift by, I see this little fox just chilling in this driveway about 10 feet away. It just sat there all proper watching us as we passed with this indifferent look on its face. And I remember thinking to myself, I've never even seen a wild fox before. And here they're just in the driveways like bougie squirrels. That's amazing. This place is amazing. But I don't remember feeling amazed. That first night in Annapolis was beautiful. Elena and Erica were still on the road. So Sarah, Caitlin, Teresa, and I walked to this nearby spot for dinner. We ate tacos and drank margaritas and did our best to catch up. The conversation began as a whirlwind conversation of stories about weddings, new jobs, and cross-country moves. But as the night went on, we talked about other things, about real things, personal things, the kind of things you only tell people who make you feel safe. After tacos, we walked down to the water and stared out over the bay. The sun had fully set, and the only light in the distance came from the stars and from the sailboats. The air smelled like salt, like sea creatures. The water was dark and choppy as it lapped up against the side of the boardwalk. We stood for a while and listened to the sounds of gulls and churning water. It was a beautiful experience, and I really wanted to feel it I wanted to be there for it. But when I peeked over those internal walls, the torrent of emotion that waited for me on the other side was overwhelming. And I could feel myself starting to cry. And in spite of myself, I felt ashamed. So when Caitlin commented that she had always thought I was more of a Cancer than a Capricorn, whatever that means, I hid behind a sarcastic remark and receded back into safety rather than letting myself be vulnerable. That evening, we took a water taxi back to the apartment. Brackish water lapped over the sides of the boat as we rode. It soaked my ass and then dripped down my legs and into my shoes as we walked back up to the apartment. It was awesome. Elena and Erica showed up the next morning with their dogs, and the pack was finally complete. We took some time to get them settled, then we leashed up the pups and we set out on foot to this little coffee shop not far from the apartment. I had a lavender lemonade and a pan au chocolat because I'm fancy. And then we walked to a nearby dog park and let the kids play while we ate pastries. Eventually, the midday heat forced us to head back to the apartment. It was too early for dinner, so Caitlin and Teresa conjured up a charcuterie board and we sat together around their dining table, telling stories and eating meat and cheese with honey, like a bunch of hobbits. The apartment was the most Caitlin place I had ever seen. Everything was fluffy except the plants and the crystals. As I looked around the room, I caught myself wondering, are these rocks just for decoration? Or is Caitlin mixing up potions in this kitchen? The thought had only just crossed my mind when, as if summoned, came a knock on the door and a brand new delivery of freshly grown crystals. Caitlin almost skipped as she brought the box back over to the table. Then she said a short incantation over the lid, which opened all on its own. Some smoke rose from inside and a fairy fluttered out. And then sitting at the bottom of the box, shining from a light that came from within, were these crystals. Now, full disclosure, I love crystals. I watch videos on Facebook about people digging them out of the ground. I go to natural history museums and look at all the different types. I think it's cool how they just grow out of the planet. A bunch of atoms arranged into these fancy rocks with cool colors and geometric shapes. Caitlin showed us each one and told us its purpose and its name. Some promoted clarity, others promoted focus. She told us about how she had used them to cope with the grief of losing her beloved dog Daisy, and how they had been a source of strength for her during the pandemic. I'm not usually one to put a whole lot of stock in the power of crystals, but I put a whole lot of stock in my friendship with Caitlin, so I kept that shit to myself. That evening, we left the kids at home and had dinner at this great little spot near the apartment. We drank wine in this little garden space and reminisced. It felt amazing to be there with them. It was like seeing my family for the first time in years. And when I really stopped and allowed myself to be fully present and in the moment, I could feel those boundaries inside of myself, those walls that I talked about, being stretched by the volume of love and gratitude that I felt for my friends in those moments. That night, we stayed up late, lazily playing board games, all of us exhausted, none of us ready for the night to end. The next morning, we went to this unbelievable crab place called Cantler's River House, where the crabs come straight out of the bay and into the steamers. They serve them in buckets, dumped right onto the table, bright red and covered in Old Bay. We cracked their shells with these little wooden mallets and we ate them with our hands. To quote Elena, I felt like Anthony Bourdain. I rolled back from Cantler's with Elena and Erica. We smoked and we talked about traveling together. She told me about her family, and we started plans to build a community where we could all live together with our friends in harmony. And in the moment, I wished that ride could last forever. If not the ride itself, just the way that it made me feel. For a brief moment, I was 22, driving around a foreign city with my best friends. The future was full of possibilities, and everything was going to be okay. Then Before I was ready, we were back at the apartment. The other car had beat us there, and the rest of the girls were waiting outside with the puppies. We lingered there on the sidewalk for a while and soaked in each other's presence before heading up the elevator back to the apartment. And then the next thing I know, I'm standing watching everyone getting ready to leave, and I'm forced to acknowledge the heartbreaking truth that this trip was never going to last forever. My vision started to blur as I watched them pack, and my walls had sprung leaks. And as Elena and Erica started to say goodbye, I ducked into a back room so no one could see me crying. There just wasn't enough time. There never could have been enough time. Even then, I could hear the girls in the other room just moments from walking out the door, and I realized I got to get back out there. I'm going to miss this. So I did my best to pull it together, and I managed a hug for both of them, but the words that I wanted to say were caught in my throat as they walked out the door. And then it was mine and Sarah's turn. And our bags were packed. Winifred was leashed up. There was really no excuse that I could find for us to stay any longer. So I turned to hug Teresa goodbye and then to hug Caitlin. And I realized in that moment that that was the first time that Caitlin and I had hugged each other all weekend, which is weird because we're big, huggy people. We're Southerners. We hug a lot. And that's when it happened. I leaned in to hug my friend. And as soon as we embraced, this feeling began to swell in my chest. And it poured over any walls that might have stopped it. And it filled my whole body with this really warm, soothing, pleasant feeling. And I know it sounds crazy, but when I closed my eyes, I could see it. It kind of pulsated and churned like water. And I know it sounds crazy, but it was a deep green color, like a forest canopy. Honestly, it was a lot like a 10-second mushroom trip. For those of you guys out there who know what I'm talking about, that's what it was like. And the feeling lingered as we climbed in the elevator and headed to the parking lot where mine and Sarah's car was parked. There was a final round of goodbyes before Caitlin and Teresa headed back up to their apartment. And then Sarah and I sat for a moment in the car, preparing ourselves for the trip back home. The warm feeling in my chest was still there as we sat there. And I still don't know what it was. I don't know if it was energy. I don't know if it was crystals. I don't know if Caitlin used her sounding bowls to unlock my heart chakra. But when I do honestly think about it analytically, what I actually believe happened was that I was suffering from something called hedonic adaptation, which is basically when your baseline ability to experience strong positive emotions has been lowered just a little bit because of some type of trauma, like the past few weeks leading up to Sarah and I's move, or just, a year in lockdown in general. And in fact, it does. It happens to all of us. And there is some interesting research that suggests that the COVID lockdowns has lowered the hedonic threshold of much of the country. And you may be feeling that even as you listen to this video. But for me, after an amazing weekend surrounded by friends whom I love and who love me and who showered me with grace and with compassion, I believe that what I felt in that brief moment with Caitlin was my threshold for love expanding, like the Grinch who stole Christmas. What is harder to explain is the visual and also physical aspects of the experience. Like I said before, I felt something in my chest, and in my mind, that something was green, and it churned like water and grew, and, like little fingers would reach out and stretch out. You know, and after spending the weekend in a room full of crystals and, playing with sounding bowls, those things, wah, 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 those things, I would be remiss if I didn't at least investigate the woo. So I did a little bit of research and I learned that there are 7 chakras, which some people believe are the main energy centers of the body. They are thought to be spinning disks of energy that should stay open and aligned because they correspond to and affect our emotional and physical well-being. The fourth of these points is the heart chakra, which is apparently located just behind the breastbone, and it's associated with feelings of deep love and compassion, and it is represented by a deep green color like a forest canopy. Now, like I said before, this is not something that I usually place a whole lot of stock in, but I didn't know this about chakras before I had this experience. And now, after this experience, I have no choice but to at least consider it. And the truth is when I do consider it, you know, what did I feel in that moment? The answer is I genuinely don't know. I don't know what happened. It could honestly just could be coincidence that those two things seemed to correlate. Um, but I've also considered that perhaps there are some emotional experiences that are shared by all humans that manifest themselves in a similar way to all of us. Perhaps it's an evolutionary adaptation or a result of common brain chemistry and physiology. I don't know. I'm a moron. I'm definitely not a doctor. But perhaps our ancient ancestors observed this phenomenon and, in their attempt to describe this shared experience, developed the concept of chakras. But I mean, like I said, who am I to speculate? Honestly, I'm a moron. So who knows? What I do know is that Sarah and I sat in that parking lot for like 15 minutes before we finally left. Poor Sarah just waited patiently in the driver's seat, feeling what I can only imagine was a primal terror as she watched the man that she had married weeping softly into his hands and babbling on about love, gratitude, consciousness, and crystals. So if you've ever had an experience like this, let me know in the comments. If you think it was chakras in one hand, let me know. If you think it was just hedonic adaptation in the other hand, let me know. Sorry about the shaky camera, guys. I'm working this out. I don't know. It was a really interesting experience, and I'm really, really glad that I got to have it. I really appreciate the people that I got to visit, and I had an amazing time on my trip to Annapolis. And it was exciting to tell you guys about it. So that's it for this week's episode of Musing with Mitch. I hope you like the new format. Let me know what you think about it. I'm going to try to get another one of these knocked out in the near future. They're definitely not happening as fast as I thought they would, but that's okay. I'm having a blast. I hope you guys are too. I love you all, and I will see you next time. Bye.